This is Apropos. EU leaders are gathered tonight in Brussels to chart a new course in transatlantic relations, a day after the US president dramatically backed away from his insistence on acquiring Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark, and dropped his threat to impose fresh tariffs on European nations that support Copenhagen. Ahead of tonight's meeting, Emmanuel Macron said European pressure had forced Trump into a U-turn on the mineral-rich island. Nick Rushworth has the latest.
Is it broken or not?
It is an emergency summit for the EU to rethink ties with Washington after the US President Donald Trump's threat of tariffs and even military action to acquire Greenland, which is a semi-autonomous territory of EU member Denmark.
I think it's clear for everybody that we are a sovereign state and we cannot negotiate about that because it's a part of the very basic democratic values. But of course we can discuss with the US how we can strengthen our common cooperation on security in the Arctic region.
People thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
Trump stepped back on Wednesday from his threat of tariffs on 8 European nations and ruled out using force to take control of Greenland, suggesting a deal was in sight. Along the way, he has ruffled feathers with long-standing European allies.
We have returned to a situation that seems much more acceptable to me, even if we remain vigilant. So the conclusion to be drawn is that when Europe reacts in a united manner, using the instruments at its disposal, and when it is threatened, it can command respect. And that's a very good thing.
EU governments remain wary of another change of mind by the US president, who is increasingly seen as a bully. The European Parliament on Wednesday, in protest over US pressure to acquire Greenland, put its work on hold on ratifying a trade deal agreed in the middle of last year between the US and the EU.
Amid the ongoing fallout from the Greenland crisis, European leaders have been taking a somewhat tougher stance with the US president. So too have certain populists who've traditionally been enthralled by the rhetoric of Donald Trump. Well, to discuss all of this and more, let's bring in Georgios Samaras, Assistant Professor of Public Policy at the School for Government at King's College London. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme this evening. Firstly, in your view, has Donald Trump now become a political liability for the far right here in Europe, given the threats he's been making against Denmark and the criticism he's been making more generally of the entire continent?
Trump has managed to somehow boost several far-right projects across Europe. We've known that for the past year. We've seen it especially with Germany and AfD. He also supports Reform UK, but the oxygen that he has lent to all those parties is definitely turning into a liability and has always been a liability because we're entering a new era. And I hope that voters and viewers can understand that, where political annihilation of whole systems can occur during security threats that come and go. So those nationalist projects that rely on sovereignty, on protecting borders, on trying to somehow deal with migration, they have nothing to benefit from a dictator who has been openly so far trying to threaten a sovereign nation with annexation.
And talk to us then a little bit then about how populists have been shifting their narrative. Are we seeing more of them speak out against US imperialism?
Well, for starters, I don't think that populist is the right word to describe those actors. We're looking at proper far-right projects. So we're looking at far-right politicians who have been always using this kind of rhetoric to use their nationalist, I would argue, sentiment. They definitely have nothing to gain from US imperialism, and they haven't really attacked US imperialism in the last couple of months. Many of them applauded the abduction of Maduro in January. Many of them have tried to repeatedly act as mediators. Look at Giorgia Meloni, and others have remained silent. Vox in Spain has been quiet. I don't really understand why Meloni has tried to be a mediator here, but there is no doubt that she doesn't want to provoke Trump. So speaking, against imperialism would probably be a good move if they wanted to support their nationalist projects. But there is no ideological or moral compass here. They just argue that the connections to the US should be sustained.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, these politicians, do they actually agree or disagree with Trump, or are they just wary now, the ones who have been speaking out? For example, Jordan Bardella here in France has been critical of Trump when it comes to what's happening with Greenland and also his tariff threats. Is it ideological, as you're suggesting, or are they just trying to please voters, or rather not displease them?
The key thing is that those ideological projects are not firm. They don't really have a proper manifesto to deal with such emergencies. So at times of ideological thinness, which right now expose that they're not willing to do everything they can to protect sovereignty, they're indeed trying to please their voters. The voters think that Trump is some kind of mastermind who has been leading a far-right government for the past year, and he's inspiring other projects across the world. However, that's what some of those far-right parties get wrong. Trump appears to be deeply unpopular with the general population across Europe. YouGov has confirmed that several times over the past year. As things stand, Trump has absolutely no purpose and should not be intervening in European politics. If far-right projects don't understand that and they think that, acts against sovereignty are allowed, then I'm pretty sure that this kind of flip-flopping will eventually crumble. There is no way to win voters while they're trying to appease Trump.
Yeah, because public opinion here in Europe, it is largely hostile to Donald Trump, as you say, but does he appeal to far-right voters? Are there figures on that, on how people who would vote for the likes of Jordan Bardella or Marine Le Pen here in France, how do they actually feel about Donald Trump?
That is a good question. In my view, lots of those far-right voters, especially in Europe, I'm not talking about the American now, electorate, the European electorate is obsessed with migration. We know that, but they're obsessed with migration because people talk about migration, because it's a top-down issue. So migration was one of the key buzzwords in the past year because of the many elections that we saw in Europe since actually the European election. Now that migration is fading out as a buzzword and national security comes in, they will try to do anything they can to play with those words, to use some of those topics in order to advance a new agenda. So this is new territory for most of those far-right projects. Voters will now react to this. We don't know how they're going to react for now, but we will find out very soon whether these strategies play out, because polling companies have so much work to do in the next couple of weeks. They need to capture and understand how voting behavior is going to be shaped, perhaps during one of the most turbulent eras we have witnessed since the end of World War II and the economic crisis of 2008.
And you referred to Giorgia Meloni a little earlier, strong ally of Donald Trump. The fact that the likes of far-right leaders here in France don't seem to be entirely on the same page as her, for example, when it comes to what's happening in Greenland and just the US president's policies in general, does that pose any kind of risk for the far-right itself as a group, that certain divisions may start emerging there within the far-right itself?
For starters, to respond to the first point about Jordan Bardella, I think it's an honorable stance, for sure, but it's a little too late because he has endorsed Trump. They fooled around a lot over the past year, and Trump has been defending Le Pen throughout her legal battles. So I think that it's quite late that they finally realized that Trump poses a security threat. The differences between Meloni and Bardella are very clear. Meloni is trying to play a very different role. She has a very different ideology as well, looking back at her neo-fascist past as a member of Mussolini's youth, while Bardella is a much younger politician and he's following Le Pen's lead. What this shows us is that we cannot take the far-right as a whole. There are different far-right movements across Europe with significant differences. And in the end, many of them are now trying to test the waters because at the end of the day, they don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know how Trump is going to escalate or de-escalate this rhetoric. they're testing the waters, and those differences are always significant when it comes to reacting to such major events and incidents across the globe.
And just finally, is this an uncomfortable position for the likes of Jordan Bardella to find himself essentially aligned with the French president on this issue?
I mean, I don't find it personally weird, and it makes sense that they're aligned, because I find it personally fascinating that the far right and the center right are coming together for something that was maybe indisputable 20 or 30 years ago, and that's national sovereignty. Far right leaders traditionally emphasize nationalist tendencies. As things stand, Bardella is doing what's, I guess, in the interest of French people, to retain sovereignty, to protect European borders, and ensure that no invasion is going to happen in Greenland. The most crucial part here is that a political system has to come inevitably together. That also involves Mélenchon. They've all called for an aggressive response to Trump. Some have argued that they need to exit NATO. Jordan Bardella aligned with Macron because he knows what's at stake here. And because of how unpredictable Trump can be, they don't really know what will come next. And it's better to be safe than sorry. And I find the response quite normal in France as things stand, because Macron has taken a more decisive stance compared to other European leaders anyway.
Georgios, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. We appreciate your time. That is Georgios Samaras, Assistant Professor of Public Policy at the School of Government at King's College London.